So now we will switch to English because our next speaker doesn't really understand Swedish, as far as I know. He is engineering lead at Intel's creative department. He has previously worked at Microsoft and Samsung. And he will talk about the skills and mindset it takes to be a successful prototyper. So a big round of applause for Seth Gibson.
Cool. Everybody hear me? Awesome. Well, first of all, yeah, it's I got to see some of the other presentations, and I got to say it's really cool what you guys are doing here. Though you are correct, I don't speak Swedish, so I didn't get too much out of them other than what I saw in the foils, which was a little concerning because I thought to myself, oh my goodness, maybe I need to give this presentation in Swedish too. Which, given that my Swedish is maybe a day and a half old, I'd say it probably doesn't qualify as conversational, but. Maybe just to change it up. I mean, I could do it in a different language. I mean, porque hablo un poquito español y también hablo portugués, mas vocês, alguien? Now? Então, all right, back to English. So I've also been told I have a really bad habit of turning my back on the audience to check out my slides. So if anybody sees me doing that, don't just throw something at me. But yeah, it's funny. I actually had this whole intro spiel that I wanted to give you guys with like fire and smoke and lasers and dancers, but in the sake of time, we won't do that. And I'll spare you guys the horrible opening joke I was going to tell, but I will be at the banquet tonight, so if anybody really wants to hear it, come grab me, and if I've had enough to drink, we might be able to, oh, that's not pleasant. If I've had enough to drink, we might be able to do that. All right, let's make sure that doesn't happen again, so I'll stay close. Magic. There we go. All right. So yeah. First of all, thank you so much to the organizers for having me here. It's always a privilege for me to get to come anywhere, whether it's the U.S. another country, and speak to especially students about kind of what we do at Intel, and not just Intel, but sort of what's going on in kind of this whole area now of sort of this, I guess, collaboration of research and interaction design and prototyping and UX that just a couple years ago was kind of almost unheard of, and so I had something for this, and okay, so it's good for me because honestly, even though I've been doing this for 5 years, I still don't know entirely what it is that I do. There's definitely days where I go into the office and think to myself, wow, I literally have no idea what I'm doing. And as you can imagine, that makes for interesting conversations, especially with people like my parents when I try to tell them what it is that I do. But usually that conversation just comes back to, yes, I'm employed, I can pay rent, I'm not living on the street most of the time. But thankfully for here and now, you guys are not my parents, so we can have a bit more of an in-depth conversation, and we'll do that today. We're going to talk like Klaus said, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of where we are now, at least how I see this kind of discipline evolved, and hopefully that'll give you guys an idea of where we might be going and how you fit into it, and then we'll look at some of the work we've done at Intel just to give you an idea of kind of the tools and tech we use and how that sort of fits into things like product design and all that good stuff. So first off, a little bit more about me and why I think I'm qualified to tell you guys how to do this stuff. So as it was mentioned, I've been into computers for, I don't know, way too long, probably longer than some of you guys have been alive. And but even before that, I was into art. I was the kid who was always, drawing on the walls of his parents' house or his siblings or the margins of his notebook, much to my teachers and my parents' dismay. And I think I was about 6 when my dad brought our first home computer, our first computer home. And an interesting story about him is that he was one of the first people in the Air Force to when they kind of started to make the transition to all digital radio equipment to really get trained up on that stuff. So I think he sort of passed that on to me, and so here I am today. When I was in games, I worked in a very interesting discipline, and it was kind of somewhere between art and engineering, and I kind of attribute that back to the way I grew up. But because even I was writing games in BASIC when I was like 6, 7 years old. I was playing with simple MIDI synthesizers and digital paint programs, but I didn't really kind of make that connection between art and technology. When you're 6, it's like you push a button, something cool happens. You're like, oh great, something happened, and nobody died, awesome. But it wasn't really until I got into high school and I kind of discovered the demo scene. And any demo sceners here? Anybody? Nobody? Oh, you guys. And kind of embarrassed. It's weird that I have to come over to Sweden and explain the demo scene to people. But But that was really when this whole idea of using software to make art kind of clicked for me. The idea that you're actually writing code that creates kind of that sort of elicits a visual response. That your software is actually a medium. And so that sort of got me thinking about technology differently. And through a series of very interesting decisions, like I said, I ended up in the games industry. And when I was in games, I wasn't really the best programmer, and I certainly wasn't the best artist, as I really had no kind of formal training in either one. So I ended up getting to do the kind of stuff that, I guess for lack of a better term, nobody really wanted to do. That was things like doing physics setup and asset cleanup and particle effects, which was kind of cool. Writing shaders, which at the time was very rudimentary. In fact, I'm old enough to remember a time before there were shaders in games. But basically, it was this discipline that we called technical art. So it was, you were the guy who kind of sat between the artists and the engineers and kind of had to be versed in both. And at the time, I wasn't really thinking of kind of how that would evolve. I didn't really make the connection between that and what I'm doing now because, well, back then there was no really what I'm doing now. So, but if you think about it, it's really interesting because as a technical artist, like I said, you do have to be versed in technology, you do have to be versed in design, you do have to be versed in art, which I'm sure is hopefully not unfamiliar to any of you guys. But more than that, you also get the opportunity to do user research and UI design and experience research because, some of the most demanding clients in the world are some of the artists I've worked with. And, so God bless those guys, but you certainly learn how to manage client relationships in a job like that. But it's interesting because in prototyping, we do a lot of the same stuff. So, you do have to kind of design features and develop architecture, and at some point you have to implement all that, and then you do have to do the user research and the user interface. And thankfully in prototyping, you don't really have to stand things up and support them. Once it kind of works for the demo, you're good to go. So, and like I said, it's really interesting for me now to kind of look at sort of where all this has gone for both me personally and both as an industry because, when I was going to school, I went to something like school, and that's, okay, glitch, awesome. All right, we'll roll with it. Actually, what happens if I do this? Yay, magic, all right, again, twice now. So when I went to school, the classrooms kind of looked more like this. In fact, I went to a tiny kind of specialization program in Seattle where we learned Maya, and I think there were a whole 2 of us in the class maybe. And thankfully, we're both still doing industry-related work, so maybe that speaks to, I don't know, the quality of the education. Maybe we're both just awesome people. But really, there's so many factors that kind of contributed to this back then. One of them was, of course, the fact that the hardware and the software were almost prohibitively expensive. If you guys, I don't know if any of you guys have experience with SGI machines or IRIXs or any of that stuff, but when you have a $100,000 machine running several other $100,000 worth of software, that's not the kind of thing that you're going to have on your desk. That's not the kind of thing that even you're going to have at a college lab. And unless you're a very specialized company, you're not going to have that. So not only do you not have access to that, the means to disseminate the information are just not there because, it's 1 or 2 guys who are doing work somewhere in a lab and nobody really knows who they are. Somebody somewhere knows that there's a guy who does this work, but that's about it. In fact, I remember a story, and I don't know if this is true. This is a story that's related to me, but back in '95, a friend of mine said he went to SIGGRAPH, and there was a small company who, had a booth, and they were trying to get people to come over and talk to them because they wanted to hire people out in California. And they were giving out swag, posters, all that stuff. They were offering to move people to California, train them in the software, and apparently they were having a really hard time getting people to just come over and talk to them. And that company's name was Pixar, by the way. And like I said, I don't know if that's true. Somebody can fact check that. But like I said, it does kind of speak to the state of the industry at the time. So beyond that, I don't know if anybody have had the pleasure of using any of these tools, but we were dealing with stuff like this. You have the old Softimage, pre-XSI, pre-Microsoft's acquisition of Softimage, which was expressly for the purpose of moving the industry over to the PC, which I guess we can thank them for, because now we can all do this kind of work. And then on the right, you have what was called the Advanced Visualizer. This is from a company called Wavefront. And you guys might recognize Wavefront as half of Alias Wavefront, who later was acquired by Autodesk, but before that published a piece of software called Maya. So this is what Maya actually used to look like before it was Maya. And the really interesting thing, well, interesting, painful thing about this software was that, nowadays, if you want to write code to do this work, you can. You know, if you want to write Maya scripts, if you want to write plugins, it's sort of optional. Back then, you didn't really have a choice. You know, you didn't get pixels on screen without dipping into command line world for at least a little bit. So not only do you have specialized and expensive hardware, specialized and expensive software, you also need very, very specialized people to do this work. So, and as I said, you know, not being able to disseminate that information made it kind of a very very dark ages, shall we say, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but you know, dark in the sense of not enlightened or you know or obscured, I suppose. So you think about where we are today, and you know, nowadays, you know, our UIs look more like this. Whether it's for a tool, whether it's for you know whatever, and you know, it's no coincidence that I put the iPad up there. Because to my mind, a lot of this happened because of what Apple did. And I know it's a little cliche to give a design talk and mention Apple, but you sort of have to, because they did some really, really interesting things. So first of all, you know, if you think about kind of that continuum of the iPod, iPhone, iPad, and sort of what it did to the market, you know, if we start non-chronologically, you know, we'll start with like the iPhone. You know, the iPhone, you know, up till then, everybody kind of you know, there's sort of this disparity between not just what a mobile phone looked like and what services offered, but really between who had one and who didn't. In fact, I actually didn't have a mobile phone until the iPhone was released. So what I feel like the iPhone really did was it took kind of an existing product and made it a must-have. So now everybody wants one of these things. Now everybody has to have one of these things. You know, you're not cool if you don't have one. You're a Luddite. You're behind the times. Secondly, so there's the must-have. Secondly, if you think about the iPod, so prior to the iPod, you know, I mean, by the time the iPod came out, we all knew what MP3s were. We all had our digital music collections. But in the product space, you know, you had things like the Creative Sansa, I think Dell had an MP3 player, but it wasn't anything anybody actually knew about. You know, people sort of knew that these devices existed, but nobody really had one. If you mentioned it to somebody, it's like, oh, okay, it's cool, yeah, I'll take one of those. And with the iPod, all of a sudden the MP3 player becomes a real thing. It becomes a want to have. So we have a must have, and now we have a want to have, both from the same company. And lastly, this one, the iPad, is the one that's the most interesting to me, because it took a computing device, you know, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's a computer, and made it your grandparents have. So, I mean, I think we all have at least one friend who said, yeah, you know, prior to the iPad, my grandparents weren't online, didn't want a computer, didn't want anything to do with one, and so now it is. So we have the must-have, the want-to-have, and the your grandparents have, which to me are all pretty important. And like I said, I feel like largely in part to this, you know, Apple's being one of the first companies who was able to kind of infuse technology with both, you know, some modicum of art and design. You know, they took tech and a product and made what I call, for lack of a better term, a technology experience. You know, so now it's not just about the piece of hardware in your hand. It's about, you know, how do I actually interact with this? How does it make me feel when I interact with this? You know, and I think, you know, if you look at the lines, at least over in the U.S. for what it's like anytime Apple launches a new product, I think it's safe to say that people have a very, very deep emotional bond, whether good or not, with their Apple products. And we can, you know, whether that's due to, you know, Apple's creating of a walled garden, as some people say, or, you know, otherwise closing the ecosystem. And I should probably add at this point that any strongly worded opinions I express are mine and not my company's. You know, they really did change the face of the technology product and the space in consumer products as we know it. But, you know, as I think it's also safe to say that this didn't come without kind of a downside. You know, I think, as we can all attest to, one of the sort of, we'll say, shortcomings of consumer-driven and product-driven advances is that, you know, you get to that point where you say, okay, I figured out how to make a profit out of this. I figured out how to make the most profit out of this, or somebody figured out how to make the most profit out of this thing. So that's obviously the right answer. Let's all do that. And in Apple's case, and there have been volumes written on this, the answer that people came up with was simplicity. Let's make everything very simple, to the point where I feel like if certain people had their way, the consumer user interface would basically have just been a single large shiny button that you push, and it somehow, I don't know, through a combination of reading your biometrics and all the data it's collected from your use, it just knows how to do what it is that you want it to do. So great, but not very exciting. So thankfully for all of us here and now, in my opinion, where we are could not have happened due to a single approach, like say the consumer-driven advance in technology. So the other approach, I think, came from a very, very disparate space that will probably be familiar to you guys. On the one hand, we have this sort of what I call consumer and product development driven fact, and on the other hand, we have what's called this research and entertainment driven science fiction. And that word entertainment is very key because you think about how many advances in technology have come from something in entertainment space, whether it's the raw compute and the pixel polishing power that we have for video games today that was driven by that group of entertainment, or whether it's the beautiful visionary sort of futuristic UIs that we have from the film industry. So the interesting thing about both of those is, for a long time, us poor game guys looked at what the film guys were doing and said, oh man, I wish we could make our stuff that pretty. And on the other hand, you had the film guys who looked at kind of what the guys in games were doing and saying, oh man, I wish I could make my stuff that fast and that interactive. And thankfully, this actually did end up happening. There was sort of this convergence, and I'm about to drop another kind of cliche on you guys, but that was the 2010 film Minority Report. And so, for those of you who don't know, the interesting thing about Minority Report was that Dr. Underkoffler, who we see here, and his team at I think then pre-Oblong Industries actually built this interface for real, and you can actually see him demoing it at his TED Talk. So finally, we've come to this spot where we can do we can do what in real time we'd sort of only envisioned for a long time. And Dr. Underkoffler did a TED Talk back in 2010 that's on YouTube, and if you haven't watched it, I certainly recommend you do. I'm not going to spoil it too much for you, but he does make some interesting points about how having a real-time system like that affected the production of the film. But he makes some other interesting quotes that I think what we can take from is that as much as we might think that this consumer-driven development and this sort of research, entertainment-driven development processes are different, they're actually very convergent. So first of all, the thing he says is, and you guys have probably heard this as well, he says, make everything as simple as possible, but no simpler. And I think that's attributed to Einstein, at least by the internet, so take that with several grains of salt. And but it's a good point, right? Because sure, maybe for the class of work that we do on our phones or certain computing devices, the single ubiquitous shiny button Uber alles works, but imagine a different solution, right? I mean, I remember standing on stage at SIGGRAPH a couple years ago and talking to a gentleman from Apple about gesture dialects and gesture languages and gesture context and gesture meaning and gesture interpretation. And so for something like gesture, for example, I mean, could you really solve that with the one single gesture? I mean, maybe you could, but it would end up sort of being this 5-minute long interpretive dance looking thing where you sort of, you end up like, I don't know, in some horrible pose at the end. But I digress. So the point there is that what's simple for some things is obviously impossible for others. So maybe simplicity URLs is not the answer. Maybe simplicity is not just this kind of blanket we can sort of lay over everything and say, good, we're done. The other thing he said, and this is the one thing I hope you guys certainly all take to heart, is that we can no longer have advances in technology without design being integrated from the beginning. So that's a really tall order, because if you think about that, that puts us right back where we were sort of at the beginning of this talk, where, goodness, now we have this incredibly specialized work that takes incredibly specialized people to do, that requires specialized hardware and specialized software and basically all manner of specialization. So how do we actually get there? Well, thankfully, where we were 20 years ago is obviously not where we are today. And nowadays, for example, we get to use things like this, and hopefully you're all familiar with this lovely piece of technology. For those who aren't, this is the Unity editor. And the cool thing about all the advances that have come in the last 10, 15 years, and certainly the last 5, is that now tools like this are so flexible and so accessible that if you're not doing this kind of work, you kind of got to ask yourself why. And if you look at something like Unity, for example, if you've been keeping up with what's been going on with the HoloLens, for example, like I think Unity is actually the HoloLens's lead dev platform, and that's not the only one. I know there's a depth camera / skeletal tracking system coming out that I think only ships Unity support, which I don't think is a great idea, but it does speak to the fact that there are tools out there that are, like I said, accessible, flexible, and can kind of be bent to whatever their will. And it's not just Unity. You think about things like, say, the Unreal Engine or processing or Cinder or open frameworks or any of these tools that people are using to do research and digital art with. And first of all, they're all free. Secondly, they're all very well written. They all have very, very passionate communities around them, and they're all being contributed to by people who are doing that work. For example, we use Cinder at Intel for a lot of stuff. And when we do a project, when we finish a project with it, at the very least, we may publish the source code, and at the most, we might actually submit a pull request to the repo based on, hey, we found this bug, or we found this kind of cool method that you guys might want to check out. So even more than that, as I mentioned, the domain's completely changed. So, like I said, you have people all over the world doing this kind of work. And it's not, like I said, it's not just us. It's Intel, it's Google, it's Apple, it's Microsoft, it's Yahoo, and 20 other companies that have messaged me on LinkedIn in the last 5 minutes probably. And the reality is, it's because, like I said, we're all talking, we're all out there, we all want to share this with people, and we want this all to grow. And I mean, honestly, I've probably learned more about Visual Studio and C++ in the last year, especially by following this sadly fictional but seminal tome's advice, and you guys should too. But my point is that, like I said, there's a lot of work out there. It's definitely a different discipline than it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. It's not near as painful as it used to be. It's actually very exciting, and most importantly, I think to you guys, is that it's really hard to find people to do this kind of work. I know we're constantly struggling to hire people. I know, and talking to people at other groups, that's the same thing. And I think a lot of that comes from just not knowing what the scope of the work is, not knowing that the work is available, and most of all, not knowing, that there are people out there looking for you. I mean, because I've read, for the kind of work we do, I've read probably 10 different job recs that all read differently. Some of them read like a designer, some of them read like a hardcore rendering engineer, some of them read like somebody who just absolutely doesn't exist right now. And so I guess what I want to talk about next then is I want to show you guys some of the specific work we've done at Intel, and maybe it'll kind of line up with what you guys are doing, what you guys know, and if not, we can talk about it later. So, awesome. So boring slides over. On to exciting stuff. Okay, so when we started Intel, I guess the group I'm with now probably started 5, 6 years ago. The specific incarnation, the Intel RealSense Interaction Design Studio, is about 4 years old, and I think I was the 5th or 6th person hired on. And at the time, we didn't really know what we were doing. I think the mandate was somewhere between make it like Minority Report and make it like the iPhone. So I mean, easy, right? So so we had some ideas of what our hardware stack was going to look like. We had some ideas about kind of where they want to go with it, but a lot of it was just us kind of messing around. So we'll start with this, and this is because at the time, we knew we wanted to do gesture recognition, gesture control. We didn't really have a stack for it, and as you guys can probably tell, we're just doing very simple kind of frame diffing here to figure out motion tracking, and that was back when I had much shorter hair. And so this actually ended up at least informing kind of where we were going to go, but that specifically birthed this wonderful project, because at the time we were all very much into the idea of, oh, come back video, don't be that way, magic 3 times, awesome. So because we were all very interested in, at least those of us in the lab, were very interested in getting people away from computers, giving people kind of a reason to sort of interact with each other, interact with other people. I'm not sure why we decided on this as kind of a natural stepping stone from motion tracking. And sadly, management also agreed that there wasn't a huge demand for user interface for fish, but this was fun. So, and again, this is all very simple, done with kind of off-the-shelf software. I think we used processing for both of these. So cool, but we were still kind of in this area where there was no exemplar work, very little exemplar work. The Kinect had only been out for a couple years. It had only been hacked 5 years ago, 4 years ago, no, 2 years ago at the time, sorry. So we were kind of just playing around. So, and of course we came up with things like this, which is simple physics interacting with the depth buffer. You can kind of see something vaguely human in that. Again, processing box 2D, or of course, the one thing that every creative coder will tell you that you're going to end up doing at some point is something with a 2D fluid sim. So there we go. There's our 2D fluid sim. And of course, these are all pretty. They're all exemplar. They don't really get you anywhere, though. Well, I mean, they make great stage demos, but that's really about it. So we started thinking about, well, what could we do UI-wise? So of course, the first thing we did was very simple 2D UIs. Grass release, very sort of connect-ish. And again, all with processing, all with, like I said, freely available software, although I don't think the hardware for this is available anymore. This was one of our very early cameras that's kind of been lost to time in the warp of space. But the cool part about this is, as we were doing this stuff on the UX side, our SDK guys were taking sort of these experiments we were doing and kind of iterating on the software stack. And so at some point we got to a place where we could actually start building, I guess, better exemplar projects. So this is kind of the first real big project we built. And let's see if I can full screen that and bring the sound up. Nope. But anyway, this is a kind of a multimodal sort of gesture and voice-based demo we did. And as you can see, as the user speaks a certain word, it pops up the UI, which is kind of just a very simple hitbox-based, drag your finger through. This was before there were gesture libraries or any sort of gesture recognition, so we had to figure out how to do something like gestures. This is kind of what we came up with. And I have to let this whole thing play. And so this kind of led to a notion on our team that, well, we want to do much more with hand interaction. We like gestures are cool, but what about kind of fine hand interaction? So from there we sort of evolved to this sort of thing, which is, if you can you can't really see the hand there. So there is actually a hand in there that's kind of, oh, there we go. Yeah, there's our boy. And this is basically a depth and physics-based hand simulator, so similar to what the Leap Motion does, but before Leap existed. And from here, we went to, so that was cool, and then from here we need a CES demo, so it became this. And this is probably one of my favorite demos, because, like I said, this actually made it on stage at CES, I think in 2014. And we didn't know about it until until somebody emailed us and said, "Hey, you guys got to check this out." And it was a link to somebody's Twitter feed, and I think the specific tweet said something like, "Intel just demoed a snake vomiting gold coins on stage. I love CES." And so, even though we call this demo the treasure cave to or publicly to us in the lab, this will always be the vomit snake demo, for hopefully obvious reasons. And again, all done with very simple off-the-shelf stuff. I think that was Unity and a custom hand tracker. So all that shiny stuff is cool, but it doesn't really get you too far other than the want to make games. So, but like I said, as we're doing our stuff, the guys on the SDK team are doing their stuff, things get prettier, things get more useful, so that kind of let us do stuff like this. And this is a gesture-based data visualizer, and when it decides to come back, it'll be really awesome, I swear. There we go. So as you can see, as I swipe left and right, we change the days on our I think that's some NAHA wind data, and then as we raise our hand, we can select certain slices. So this was all really cool, and what that demo did specifically was kind of convinced our higher ups that our stuff was maybe in a place where we could start sort of talking to companies about building products. So thankfully for us, there were some very, very forward thinkers at the LEGO Future Lab. And so this is a series of prototypes we did for this. So starting with this one, this is basically scan data from our vision platform, and you can turn it into Legos basically. And the idea was, wouldn't it be cool to be able to scan a person, scan a scene, turn it into Lego bricks, and either build your own models from it, or maybe have a digital version of this that you play games on top of. And again, all done in Unity, all done with freely available software. So cool, but they sort of decided they wanted to try something different, maybe something more directly interactive. So we thought, well, going back to our earlier hand stuff, what could we do? Could we maybe come up with some sort of grasp release, some sort of simple hand interaction? And this is one of the tests we did for that. And you guys who are familiar with OpenCV probably know what's going on here. That's what we're doing. If you're not, it's basically just the time-honored technique of convexity defects to figure out what a hand is. So from there, they said, okay, that's cool. We like where you're going with that. What else can we do with gestures and pose detection? So we came up with this. And the thing I get about this one is everybody says, wow, you look so happy at the beginning. Yeah, it's because the bloody thing finally worked after way too long. But again, simple gesture recognition, gesture and pose detection, changing state, very cool. And so the guys at the Future Lab, who, like I said, are thankfully very creative and know their platform very well, eventually came up with this. And my sound is not loving me, and that's why. Let's change
A keyboard and a mouse to play. You just move like this. When you fly, you have to put your hands out so then the camera can sense you. Portal board.
Get it? Yes. Nice. All right. So Dad's turn.
And I think that's actually, you can actually like download that from our app store and play it. But the cool thing to us was, it feels good to actually do something that informs a real product. So you're not just stuck in research land forever. And that actually got us some really interesting ground again with management, because then they would start coming to us and saying, okay, well, what else can we do? Can we do higher impact stuff? Are there other things we can do for this? So the next kind of major product we did was what we called the UBI OOB, out of box experience. So basically, this is the thing that you get when you first plug in a RealSense camera, and it sort of introduces you to the concepts of the hardware. So we wanted to do something that was a little more artistic and something that also kind of conveyed to people the idea that this is actually a 3D camera. It actually kind of knows where you are in space. It kind of knows who you are and knows you as a person. And so we did some other tests. We started with this. The idea here being, well, how do we convey to people that you are actually seeing, that's not just a webcam, it actually can sort of segment people out. It can sort of figure out based on, say, the environment, who you are. And this is kind of a cool project for me personally, because I think a buddy of mine saw this and said, wow, you're actually like, writing demos for money now. And I was like, oh yeah, I am. All right, I'm a professional demo senior. That's cool. I dig that. So we liked this. From there, we went to this, which is, again, very simple little experiment with frame buffers and shaders. And anybody who knows GLSL probably knows exactly what's going on here. And everybody really liked this one as well. People, it was funny because when we did the user testing, when we actually did this with the sound, people actually would tell us, oh yeah, I could actually feel, it almost feels like I can feel the surface of the water. So that ended up informing this. We worked with a group called the Barbarian Group, who, if you guys know, is the group behind the Cinder framework. And it ended up looking like this. This is actually one of the girls in our lab. But like I said, this is a running product. I think this is also out there. If you buy a RealSense camera now, you actually get this application. It's always really cool to see like what kind of spin somebody else puts on your prototypes. You do something and then you go through some creative iterations and it comes back, and when it's better than your thing, that's always good. And I think the Barbarian Group did an amazing job. That shade of blue there is just. Anyway, okay, so you get the gist of that. So let's see. So we've done, direct products, which is cool. We've gotten to participate in internal development. The next step then was to try and figure out what we wanted to do, say as how we wanted to maybe influence some of our business pillars, and these are the kind of things that, is above products. These are things we sort of disseminate out to our hardware partners and software partners and say, hey, build us things like this. So we've been kind of exploring AR for a long time. And we sort of decided that we wanted that to be one of our business pillars. So this was one of the first demos we did for AR. And the idea was, to kind of take, some known AR techniques, but maybe infuse them with a degree of interactivity beyond just being able to kind of hold up, a piece of paper with a picture on it and move it around. So, and this is using an off-the-shelf toolkit called Total Immersion. And I think it's also, and then of course it's using our own vision and gesture detection platform. And so management decided, okay, we like AR. What else can you do? Well, how about a hardware solution? So we came up with this fun thing. And this is some of you guys might know this is I think people call it a magic lantern or a magic bulb, but it's basically a combination of a depth camera and a projector. So we can actually use real world objects to influence digital content. We can interact with digital content on a surface. And again, this is all done, I think, with Unity and OpenAI and a combination of some custom software. Interesting demo. Anyway, fun stuff. So cool. And we'll skip this one. But what that kind of led to was what we called a pillar we called augmented education, or in this case, augmented books. And I won't make you guys watch all 5 minutes of this.
So this is an interactive children's book. We have the physical book, but we also have digital content which imitates what's going on in that world and augments the experience. So in this situation, I use a storytelling hook in the sense that we are being rendered as a point cloud in the scene, and that gives a UI element so you can see where you are and what you're doing. But you are also the main character's imaginary friend. The yellow sun giggled with children's laughter.
So we had a bunch of different scenes, and this is one.
The old sea hugged Sam to the deep down.
Some interactive flocking. This is my favorite one. Let's see.
The blanket carried Sam up over the clouds. With a twist, Sam's friends set the mountaintop spinning, and the little birds flew and sang, like little birds should.
But hopefully you guys get this project as well. So a little bit, again, multimodality, AR, image recognition, gesture recognition, very cool, fun stuff. So what that got us was like I said, we actually ended up influencing a business platform, or what we call a business pillar, and augmented books, augmented education. Sadly, we had a reorg not soon after, so our augmented books and education business platform never really came to be, but we continued on. So the next kind of ask we got was, by now the management had kind of said, well, you guys are really good at making pretty stuff, so can we use this for purely creative creative pursuits, which to me was, music to my ears, because, I love making art with software, making art with code, obviously. I love music, I DJ and I VJ, so we said, well, what about music? What could we do with that? So we went down this path of visualizing point clouds creatively, and I started here. So pretty simple, point cloud, FFT levels, and this was, the idea with this was maybe, you could project this back onto somebody, or you could project this behind a VJ. But, the idea of being able to kind of integrate the user into the performance. And so, very cool. People like this. And so we got the ask of, well, can you do something like this for CES again? CES being kind of sort of the big party. So we said, well, yeah, we'll go away for a weekend and see what we come up with. And we came up with this, which is probably my favorite project I've done at Intel, because it kind of uses a little bit of everything. There's some OpenCV here, there's some GLSL, there's some OpenGL, there's all kinds of various particles. Pretty much pretty much everything I've ever done over the last like 10 years like ended up in this project somehow. So and that's what we get. And like I said, this ended up on stage at CES, I think. I want to say 2015 for the pre-show keynote. So good stuff. And this kind of spawned sort of a whole, I guess, a whole line of work that we're doing now with creative stuff, visualizing point clouds. We can look at another one. So this one is for a project coming up that I can't really say who it's for, but the background. That's sort of the gist of where we are now and what we're doing. On a personal note, I mentioned to some folks that I have to, the reason I'm not staying here longer is I have to dash back and ship another project. So this is a project that I'm doing at a conference called Creative Technology Week out in New York at the end of April. And first time ever, we'll show you a preview of what that may end up looking like. So this one's kind of cool because under the hood there's some machine learning going on. There's some invisibility. Obviously lots of blue again. As you guys can probably tell, I'm a huge fan of blue. And of course now Vimeo is not streaming. What a non-spectacular way to end. But anyway, this will be the finished version of this will be on my Vimeo channel at some point as well. So come back then and see it. And I think that's all I got. So thanks for having me here. If you have questions, I would love to take them, either here or later. But yeah, otherwise that's me.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have got a question sent to us, and it is, how many of your demos/prototypes, mainly in Unity, are available open source?
That's a good question. You would probably just have to go to my GitHub. Actually, I'm glad you asked that question because let's pull up the most important slide, which is, there we go. Yeah. So there's my GitHub. There's also an official Intel GitHub. I think it's GitHub Intel RealSense. Tons of stuff on that too. So, but yeah, we try to make a lot of this kind of available since our hardware, you can get our hardware from Intel, and none of the stuff we've shown here is really like IP defining or super secret. So yeah, so quite a bit of this is on my GitHub. So,
all right, that's cool. Is there any question in the audience right now? Yeah. Let me just repeat the question for the camera.
Yeah, sure, certainly.
So basically, where do you see this kind of technology being implemented in consumer grade software and hardware, right? Yeah.
Well, from the hardware standpoint, I'll go back to, I'll crib another line from the good Dr. John Underkoffler. At the end of his TED Talk, he actually said, this was in 2010, he actually said, in 5 years, when you buy a PC, you'll get this. It'll be built into bezels, it'll be built into infrastructure, and we've kind of hit that point right now. So for the RealSense hardware specifically, we have tablets with it embedded, we have all-in-ones with it embedded. So as a consumer product, it's actually available to buy. And we're doing, for example, we have, I think one of the apps we ship is biometric unlocking for Windows 10. And then we're not, I may not be allowed to say this, but what's the worst that could happen? I'm not sure how strongly we're investing into gesture anymore. It's still part of our SDK, and it's definitely something we're open to. But it's not, I think the idea of doing full-on gestural interfaces is a problem that still needs to be solved. But for other things, and especially for industries is also where we're seeing it. So like for our tablet, for example, it comes with a full 3D scanning stack. So you have a mobile 3D scanning platform now, for instance. We actually do have some consumer applications for that. I think there's like an app where you can sort of scan a room and then place digital furniture, just kind of see what it looks like. For example, I know we've got some AR stuff in the works, but I don't know specifically what. But it's one of those. It's one of those like there's a lot of potential, but there are still a lot of problems to be solved, which is why we need more people to kind of come do the work. So, which hopefully is all of you.
So thanks. Anything more? Oh, yeah.
So the best way to start, I would say, is actually find a project you want to work on, and then there's a lot of good platforms. Unity is probably my favorite. Unity and Cinder are my two favorites. So familiarize yourself with one of those platforms, and definitely start talking to people. If you're not on social media right now, you're kind of missing out on a really great resource. I think my being here actually started as a Twitter conversation. So, and I've gotten, it's at the point now where, I could post some random tweet about, hey, how do I solve this? And then I'll get five emails like in the next, 2 minutes about, oh yeah, try this. Go to GitHub and get this source. So start with a project. Say, hey, I want to, maybe you want to experiment with gesture interfaces, or maybe you want to experiment with 3D data viz or something, and then, go from there. So, and definitely email me if you have questions, because I more than likely can point you in the right direction. So, yeah.
Do you think we'll ever have the minority report interfaces in our home, or is that still something that looks good but will never be actually compatible with what we actually want to do?
So the question was, do you think we will ever have the minority report interface in our home? Well, I think the hardware is definitely getting there. I don't know if you've played with a Vive, for example, but it's really good. And so, this idea of being able to kind of, have kind of a virtual interface that you interact with in physical space, I think that's there already. The real question is, what do you actually do with it? Is it? Obviously, I don't know. I'm not sure for general purpose what the answer is. I'm not saying that there isn't a general purpose use case, and hopefully that's something somebody will figure out. Yeah, I'm going to say yes. That yeah, you can do that. It's just figuring out what you do with it. Like I said, do you use it for content creation? Do you use it for interacting with IoT devices? Do you use it for video conferencing? So. And then, like I said, the guys at Oblong actually built that. They built that whole system, and they have a platform called G-Speak, and then they have I think a freely available platform called Greenhouse that's basically the Minority Report API, just kind of a little more generalized. So the tools are out there if you want to tackle that.
Wait.
So the question is, somebody wanted to start working with, depth cameras. Is there a certain device I'd recommend? I'm glad you asked that too. So the group I work for at Intel, actually, we do ship a vision platform. It's called the RealSense cameras. So we have 3 of them now. We have the R200, the F200, and the SR300. They both have varying degrees of functionality. Some are one of them is longer range, one of them is super short range. One of them is primarily for 3D scanning. One of them is for if you want to do gestures and hand tracking. But yeah, if you just look up Intel RealSense, if you just Google Intel RealSense, you can find a link to that. I also it's getting harder to find, but I'm a big fan of the Connect 2 also. The Connect 2 has really good depth, and the APIs and the frameworks but the hardware's awesome. There's a platform that just came out from a company called Orbec, which is it's ORBBEC, I think, which is also really interesting, and that has a full skeleton tracking stack like the Connect, and it's got super high res depth. And so there's one more. I want to say it's just called the Zed, and it's a super high fidelity, pretty high res depth camera. I don't know what the actual features are beyond that, but yeah, it's called like the Z Stereo or something like that. So any one of those would, and they all come with, at the very least, they come with pretty simple C++ APIs. but a lot of them also have Unity support. So.
Okay, thank you so much, Seth. We have this little gift bag for you.
Oh wow! Yay, swag!
Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
Well,
thank you so much for coming out here.
Oh, yeah.
It's been a pleasure to have you. Yeah. Applause.